Malaysia consists of two land masses separated by the South China Sea about 800 kilometers apart. Before the formation of the Federation on the 60th of September 1963, there was little in common between these two parts of the ocean. Malaya is a collection of sultanates, while Borneo is the homeland of hundreds of indigenous tribes living under a colonial authority back then. While Borneo side is the British colonies, which were ruled under a central authority just about the previous century, I mean the 19th century. For what reasons this federation that has less in common in history, culture, language, apart being part of the mighty British Empire, combined into one of the most fascinating countries in the world? Let's take a look at the time about 60 years ago. Malaya in the 1960s was a different world than today. Like this advertisement in the American newspaper promoting Malaya as gay and exciting. What a wonderful time then. According to the Sleeping Aid for the Teenagers, also known as the history school textbook, mentioned that the reasons of the formation of the Federation of Malaysia are security, ethnic balance, decolonialization of the Borneo especially, and also the economic development reasons. Rather than following the textbook word, allow me to explain in depth on the reality of that time according to the theory of international politics. In the 1960 world, the newly independent third world countries need to choose sides between the capitalist America or the socialist USSR. Or a country can simply stand in the middle and choose neither. And you might think that being in the middle without any foreign interference is the best choice because you depending neither on the America or Russia. And allow me to remind you, according to Hans Morgenthau, one of the pioneers of the international relations theory in his book Politics Among Nations, published in the year 1954, mentioned that a country is a most supreme ultimate power in the politics and there is no power above, and the country need to survive on its own because if it happen, for example, an attack or insecurity or even invasion from other bigger powerful countries, no one will help. In the international political realism theory, a country needs to save itself by any means since there is no political power above a sovereign country. United Nations, you say, if you say there is any help from the international organization, for example, United Nations, it is assumed that the things happen, the help happen because any 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council actually want to protect their interests. For example, avoiding mass immigration of refugees into their borders or protecting vital resources for their own benefits. And thus, according to the realism theory, bigger country means bigger size of area, bigger population, more resources that better equipped to secure its existence rather than that a small teeny weeny country. And since Malaya and British Borneo were British colonies, some similarities are already there. For example, the common law, judiciary and economic system. And from these legal similarities, this is where the idea of Federation of Malaysia came out. Even 20 years or 30 years before the formation of Malaysia, multi-ethnic country has an issue of lack of social cohesion, or in Arabic is called as asabiah. 30th century Tunisian scholar Ibn Khaldun, in his magnum opus of Introduction, Muqaddimah, literally means the introduction, mentioned that a country with a multi-ethnicity rarely exists due to the issue of social cohesion or problem with asabiah. Social cohesion could be like existed as a part of the ethnic identity or simply made up after the formation of the country, and the social cohesion is really a tricky one to synthesize in an orderly combination of monarchies in Malaya, the settlements of Singapore, and also the tribal lands in the Borneo, and the only clear similarity is that they are all British colonies. In an unreleased beta version, Malaya, Singapore, North Borneo, Sarawak, and Brunei were suggested to join this new federation. Remember the United Nations? It was the British who suggested to the United Nations to conduct the commission to Borneo, better known as Cobalt Commission 1963, to persuade people to join Malaysia. And revisiting the realist theory propagated by Hans Morgenthau, big countries mean more resources, more people, and more problems later on. Malaya has a sizable population and also the important resources such as rubber and tin. Singapore has a financial capability as the entrepot center of Far East, while Borneo, including Brunei, has oil, vital resources in the 20th century. And at least in the financial aspect, during the 1960s, Malaya, independent Malaya, British Borneo, and Brunei already used same currency up until that time, which was Malayan dollar in Malay language, commonly known as ringgit. Even after the Malayan independence, the country is still using Queen banknotes as its currency. Just a fact, the Queen is still alive at the time of this recording on September 2021. At first, Prime Minister of Malaya Tunku Abdul Rahman welcomed the idea of the federation, so did the Chief Minister of Singapore Lee Kuan Yew. And side note, Lee Kuan Yew actually cannot speak Mandarin Chinese. Singapore agreed to the idea of the Federation of Malaysia as the way to break the chain of colonialism from the British rule. Furthermore, British, with its East of Suez policy, wanted to reduce its military presence in the colonies, withdrawing forces from Southeast Asia except one place. I will say that later on. Singapore was highly integrated with Malaya in the aspect of social linkage, economy, and culture. There was no border control between these two parts of the world. No passport. Unlike today, the causeway can be crossed within 10 minutes walking from one side to another, but the integration of Malaya and Singapore is an uneasy one. Comment below if you want to hear more. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ocean, Sarawak and Sabah were cautious at first as it seemed to be the power transferred from one master to another. In the other side, Borneo has a security issue with its long porous border with Indonesia and, of course, the open sea of South China Sea. The sparse population of Borneo very likely couldn't defend itself in case of intrusion either by Indonesia in the south, the Philippines in the northeast, or the communist insurgencies happened within the jungles of Borneo. Whereas the Sultanate of Brunei initially agreed to join Malaysia. The textbook mentioned about the issue of the seniority of the Sultan of Brunei, Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin III, and the Brunei oil rights, which retracted Brunei's decision to join Malaysia, which were true. In the other side, unlike Singapore, Brunei didn't need to worry much about its security. British forces still train in the jungle of Syria in the middle of Brunei up to this today. In fact, it was an armed uprising called Brunei Revolt in 1962 when rebels tried to overthrow the monarchy and establish a Borneo Federation friendly to Indonesia and also to Soviet Union. And thus the idea of a Borneo Federation, obviously not welcomed by the British, wants to avoid another country become Soviet or communist friendly country, and British sent the forces from Singapore to Brunei to quell the rebel, and after the revolt, British provide the security in Brunei. Thus the idea of merging with Malaysia for protection, both domestic and international, is already redundant. As such, Brunei continued being a British protectorate until the year 1984. And at the end, the final version was materialized on the 60th of September 1963 when Malaya, Singapore, Sarawak, and North Borneo, later called Sabah, were merged into a federation called Malaysia. In the era where large multi-ethnic countries were the thing of the past, the Balkanization of Eastern Europe, breakup of Yugoslavia becoming Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Montenegro, Kosovo, and new countries sprang up, even in the Southeast Asia, Timor-Leste in 2001. And question arise, how does the idea of Malaysia still relevant in the 20th century in the multi-ethnic country? And the answer back lies on the social cohesion and the power, the security issues. By the means of the social cohesion, both sides of the Peninsular Malaysia and Borneo, the people live there can do anything to excel while maintaining the culture. There are a number of political positions filled by the politicians from East Malaysia as part of the federal government, and then comes the issue of South China Sea. This is really delicate topic. Malaysia as one of the major claimants of oil, gas, the minerals and fishes lurking underneath the ocean wave. Secession has never been a good idea for some states, and because there is China currently building up the presence in the middle of the sea, and also there are United States and United Kingdom navies routinely passing through the sea. And thus we can conclude that Malaysia is a country built on security and economic concern rather than social integration. The lack of the common history, languages and culture makes a combination of a federation really odd at first. But today, Malaysia can be like synthesize the idea of being a nation, whereas the people of every ethnic can maintain their own circles of their own. While the threat of communism in the country was effectively abolished, so another socialist country like looking around up on the open sea in between Peninsula and Borneo, which means like country need to be exist for a long time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something new about the formation of Malaysia never told before in your history class. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next video.